So today's session is about agile methods. And it is building on Sebastian's startup session last week. So, if you imagine a startup like a new human trying to walk in a startup that would be trying to find a solution for a specific problem, then it's very, very similar. So a human goes through 400 experiments, 400 times trying to walk before she can take the first step. 400, right? And oh, there's Diana coming. Waiting to connect. Waiting to connect. Waiting to connect. Let's see. As you know, Africa has better internet than Germany.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's actually a guy, the guy who runs the Impact Hub in Accra. He always makes a point in checking the internet speed when he is traveling somewhere on the planet and comparing it to his internet speed at home. And home always wins.
Hey guys.
Hi, Diana.
Hello.
Sorry for being late.
No worries. No worries. How are you?
I'm fine, just very busy. Sorry.
Yeah, that's same on all ends today, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna just restart the session. I just had started with the first couple of sentences, assuming that you couldn't make it. And I was building on last week's session held by Sebastian about startups. And I was drawing the analogy between startups and babies. So a baby or a human, young, small human who's trying to start to walk is very similar to a startup. The startup is trying to find a specific solution to a problem that works, that is feasible, that is at a price point that makes it feasible, that it has technology that makes it feasible, etc. And just like the human has to try 400 times before she can take the first step and fail 400 times, the startup will very likely have to do something similar. And so today's session is all about that process, commonly known as Agile. And I'm going to start exploring it from its origins, and so we can see clearly why it is helpful, and then all the way how we can use it for motherland. I want to root this in the ideas of systems dynamic, complex systems, or otherwise known as cybernetics, a field of research that was coined and started in the 1940s when the Macy Foundation facilitated for a number of years the leading scientists in their respective fields, so this was cross-disciplinary, to come together for a couple of days into open-ended conversations. There wasn't a specific topic. And what they found was that somehow there was something that was very similar for all of them. And that in not only the way they worked, but also in their disciplines. And that something was that they were moving towards some targets in a try and error way. And that is today known in many, many names, but one name is called Lean Startup. So Lean Startup reduces this to 3 elements: build, measure, learn. And it repeats doing that in circles. So, but before we go there, why did they call it cybernetics? They call it cybernetics because that's the Greek term, or that's derived from the Greek term of the guy who steers the ship. What does the guy who steers the ship do? He looks at the goal, at where he wants to go, and then he has to adjust everything about the ship continuously as the waves pull the ship, as the currents pull the ship, as the wind pulls the ship into directions he doesn't want to go. And so he has to make deliberate choices about what direction to head in order to achieve his final or reach his final destination. That's why they called it cybernetics. It's pretty straightforward. It's what we usually do with almost anything in life. And while that was going on, the field of software engineering started slowly evolving and was very useful to organizations. If you could automate things with software that you before that needed many people for, that was very useful. So managers started writing down big specifications of pieces of software that would help them, and then bring them into the cellar where the engineers usually sit, and ask them to write that code, put that into software. Now, there were 2 problems with that. One problem was that however clear you think you're writing your specification, there's always room for interpretation. And that leads to undesirable outcomes, because whatever is going to be produced, even if it's in the best intent, is probably not what you envisioned writing it down. That's one problem. The other problem is if you write down a full specification of a very complex process, for example, then implementing that might take a long time. And while it's being implemented, the world already has changed. So even if interpretations didn't happen and it was very precise, the world might have changed. And whatever the result is, doesn't fit the world anymore. So it was a very unsatisfying process for many, many people for a long time, and burned through a lot of money. That's commonly known as waterfall, waterfall specifications. So you just define a big specification, and then it just follows its own current. It's unstoppable, and it's usually destructive. So it took a US Army general to change that. And the US Army general made a very similar observation as those scientists in the 1940s. He was a fighter jet pilot, and he knew that he couldn't just set the coordinates for his plane when trying to land 3 miles out and then relax and think about the coffee you would have later, because then you would never have to that coffee, because all the environment variables that are relevant for an airplane continuously change, and just setting your destination point doesn't bring you there. So you have to reevaluate what you're doing every couple of seconds. You have to constantly monitor what that plane is doing and adjust. And so as he was tasked with some big software project, he looked at this and he thought, how ridiculous is that kind of organization? How can you do something like this? Instead, he started chunking up what he wanted to get done into smaller pieces. And these smaller pieces then were much more doable. And that essentially led to a form of software engineering that's called Scrum. And I'm quickly going to run through the process of how that works as a fundamental building block for how to think about agile development of anything. So in software engineering projects, usually what you do is something that hasn't been done before, right? You have to invent a lot of things as you do this. So by its nature, it's very unpredictable. You don't know how hard a specific thing is going to be, because there is no solution to that specific thing yet in the world, and you have to create it, and you don't know how long that's going to take. So it's very complex. So what a Scrum team does is it has a list of all the things it wants to achieve. That's the backlog. And then there's a person who's responsible for pulling things out of that backlog that are currently most relevant in the world, to the team, to the software, to many dimensions, because that person is responsible. That's the product owner. And the product owner discusses with the entire development team, that includes everyone involved in that production, what he or she means by those things, by those tasks in that backlog. And the team asks questions and they discuss so that everybody has an understanding. And then they play something called Scrum Poker, which is they have a set of cards, and they literally have a set of cards with numbers. And those numbers are quasi-exponential. They're on the Fibonacci scale. The Fibonacci scale, if you don't know it, it's always the sum of the previous two numbers. So if you start with 0 and 1, the sum of 0 and 1 is 1. So you have 0, 1, 1. Then you have the sum of 1, 1, that's 2. 1 and 2 is 3. 2 and 3 is 5. 3 and 5 is 8. Then it's 13, then it's 21. Right? So we use the numbers between 0 and 21 to signify our intuitive complexity, perceived complexity of the task. Okay, so every member of the Scrum team thinks about, what do I think? How complex is that thing? Is it a 0, meaning it's irrelevant, or is it a 21, meaning it cannot be done in the time frame that we want to do it in? Okay. Then at the count, everybody holds up their number, and then there will be variations. And the person with the lowest number will publicly, in front of the entire team, discuss with the person with the highest number how each of them arrived at their positions. And that is a very deeply clarifying process, in that misunderstandings get uncovered, or differences in knowledge gets solved and clarified, so that after they've discussed that, the entire team does the same thing again. They integrate what they've heard and they come up with a new number. They hold it up, and then usually they all have the same number, but sometimes not. So then that process repeats. We discuss again until the entire development team agrees that the complexity of a certain task is a number, something. Now, the time frame that the team has to develop this is called a sprint. A sprint can be a week or 3 weeks or anything really, but it has to remain constant. So it's a same amount every time there's a sprint. And that's important because over time, you can get to a number of total complexity that the team can resolve per sprint. Okay, so you have 5 tasks, and each of those tasks is evaluated at complexity 8 by the team in their Scrum Poker process. You have a complexity of 40, and it turns out that you can get half of that done in your sprint. Then if that happens a couple of times, you know that realistically you can remove or resolve 20 points, 20 complexity points in your sprint as a team. Okay, so you have a velocity that's called your velocity. So the product owner is responsible for steering that. Right? He or she is the pilot or the captain of the ship, making decisions on where to go next, what steps to take. And that's a huge responsibility, of course. And then there's a second role, second important role that's not part of the team. That's the Scrum Master. That's a person who's responsible for making sure that all of the components that are in part of a Scrum process happen. So I've just described what happens in the planning meeting, but there's an equally important meeting that's the review. So after a sprint, you review the sprint and you look at the achievements and you evaluate the achievements as a team together and learn from what you've done in the last sprint and what worked and what didn't work. So usually ask the questions, what worked, what didn't work, and this can take the form of what should we add to the process, what should we remove, and what should we keep. And then there are daily stand-ups. So once a day, the entire team comes together for a few minutes, never long, to say, where do they stand? What's happening? What are they working on? Are they making progress or are they blocked in any way? So usually you describe what you've done yesterday, what you're planning to do today, and whether you're blocked or not. The Scrum Master's role then is to unblock everybody who's blocked. So it might be a resource question. You might need something. You might need access to something. You might need information from somebody who's not responding. You might just don't know how to solve that issue and you need some help from others, things like that. So the Scrum Master is responsible for helping you resolve your block. And that's why it's important to have that every day. So that's Scrum. That's if you it's very productive, but hardly ever it's used in a strictly dogmatic way. So most of the time there's some variation that the team agrees to work on that's slightly different. But it's a really good framework. Now, coming from the software engineering, other fields of economy or production or management decided that that seems to be a good, useful way of operating. And slowly it started drifting into other fields in the economic space. And one of them is product development. And that's a very generic general thing, because you can regard almost anything as a product. But it implies also that it is non-technical. It can be a service, it can be essentially anything, a process that results anything. And the way most startups currently organize themselves in order to engage in this product development cycle as fast as possible is a thing called design sprint. And the design sprint was formulated by Google Ventures, but many people have evolved similar things. So it's just one out of many. But the design sprint is a mixture between a process like Scrum and a principle like design thinking. Now, before we go into the design sprint, I'm going to expand a little bit on that element, on design thinking. Design thinking originates probably in the 70s in the MG Taylor process. And it is the question, or it answers the question of, is there a special process that creative people go through that can be more generally applied when you need to come up with new, fresh, creative solutions? For example, in a business environment, if you need to come up with a new process, if you need to come up with a new strategy, can you learn something from the way artists work, right? And it turns out that yes, there's a specific process. And there are many forms. MG Taylor is one that's led to design thinking. There's the theory U, which is also very similar. And effectively, all of them ensure that you have a process of radical opening up, so allowing a big broad field of optionality. You lower all of the barriers, and you basically make sure that as many ideas and potential solutions become visible, and then you narrow it down and you repeat that process. And because it's shaped like that, several times, it's called double diamond, right? You expand, you open up, and then you become precise again. You expand and you become closed and precise again. And so the design sprint attempts to ask one specific question. It's called, in that context, a hypothesis, and answer that question as data-driven as possible in a limited amount of time. And you can set that amount of time. 3 days usually is a healthy amount. We've done sprints in half a day. In the beginning, we did sprints in 5 days. It turns out that 3 days is quite good. And it follows a very, very specific process. At first, everybody gets clear on what's actually the question. Right? What's the question we want to answer? And then everybody gets some time to learn about that question. Right? If you don't know what field you're in, then you have to learn something. So you learn. Then you radically open up and find all sorts of solutions to getting the answer to the question, not the product. We're not so interested in that. We want to specifically answer that question. And then we go and narrow it down to one solution that we want to explore and test. Then we run the test, we evaluate the test, and then we can start with the next question. So that's one sprint. And sometimes we're tempted to think that we need a lot of data to answer a question, right? So a test has to have thousands of people respond. It turns out that usually 8 people that are involved in our testing are more than enough. So not because we also involve non-quantifiable things. So if you have an interview with somebody, it's a different story from actually counting specifics about whatever input you get. To make this a little bit more concrete, I want to describe one real-world example. There was the question of, is there space for a combination of drones, or is there space for drones in the area of solar energy? And the team that explored that was actually led by Sebastian. And they, after 1 or 2 sprints, ran a test that assumed that managers of large solar plants would see benefit in having drones fly over the plants and take imagery that would then be interpreted to see to be able to detect the effectiveness of each solar panel. So they could very easily see how effective their solar panels are, because that is something that you can identify with a thermal camera. You can easily attach a thermal camera to a drone. They, as a test, as a product for the sprint, they created a 2-page PDF file describing that service. And they had a telephone list of, I think, 10 or 20 people who ran solar parks. And they called them. At the end of the day, half of those people had already signed up for the service. They didn't even have anything. They had a 2-page PDF file. But 3 months later, they also had $1 million investment to build that. They did. Right? So that's the power of things that can happen with a sprint, right? And if you find in one sprint that something doesn't work, many people get discouraged, but actually it's a good thing because you've learned. And it turns out that the best predictor of startup success is rate of learning. How often do you fail and learn from your failure? That's rate of learning. And if you are really, really fast and precise with that, then you are more likely to succeed. So what the Agile principles give you is a way to think about failing fast and failing forward. Like famously, it's written on the walls at Facebook headquarters. Meaning, learn as a group, as a team, towards a clear goal and vision, right? And that's a missing component for us, because we know what we want to do. We know our purpose, right? We know where we want to go. We also know where we stand. And now we also know how to navigate the uncertain territory between here and our goal, right? by learning fast and never getting discouraged by a failure, right? It's just another learning, but we have to be fast. That's important. Don't stretch the learning out for 2 months. If we can gather the learning today, that's better, right? Because if you're imagine you're here, you want to go here, right? And then you decide on a path, and that path is off, and your learning is slow, meaning your correction is slow. Now you end up here, and then oh shit, right? We have to correct. Maybe you overcorrect, and then you land here instead of here, right? Rather, what you do is take a small step and see, where did we go? Oh, totally wrong direction. Fine, no problem. We go here, right? And then you slowly iterate like this, but you get much, much more precise very, very quickly, right? So make as many mistakes as possible, as quickly as possible, learn from them. That's essentially what Agile says. Okay, that's everything from my side about that.
Yay! Thank you for sharing. That's great. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I have learned is from all the different people and groups I have worked with, many people are so afraid to allow themselves to fail or to do failures. Before anything has happened, they're under so much stress and so intimidated that rather than experimenting, they just only they approaching the problems in the same way they approached everything before in their lives. So it's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm just growing more out of this, but usually I'm also very afraid to do mistakes. It's very interesting. Not the mistake itself, but I think the way it's got treated in the past. Failure wasn't very appreciated. It's just a very new trend that everybody celebrates failure as a learning.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're trained at school to have the feeling that we already need to know the answer even before the question is posed.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of exploring and learning, really, we're learning, doing things that don't work before we know what works. Okay. Yeah. On the other end of the extreme is this slightly weird public celebration of failure that is an attempt to make it culturally acceptable to fail. But that's actually not what we're after. What we're after is a culture in which we know that if something goes wrong, there's no blame, right? What we want to do is want to look at this and then we want to solve it together, right? What a culture in which if there's any blame, then the blame is assigned if you don't solve or don't attempt to solve an issue, right? If you don't bring an issue up, or if you repeat a mistake that we've already solved together too often, right? That's what cannot happen. But what can happen is new failures, always, right? And then point them out, address them, absolutely no blame attached to that. That's where the celebration part comes from. But it's not that useful to get on the stage and talk about some past failures, apart from encouraging some people to do the same. But it doesn't help too much in the process itself or in creating that safe space. So okay,
yeah,
I screwed up. I screwed up, and come to the table and say, guys, I screwed up. and this is the result, and this is what happened, and here's my ideas of how to solve that in the future. Well, cool, right? Everybody screws up from time to time. So and sometimes it's nobody's fault. It just doesn't work. So we have to find a solution together, right? So yeah, no blame. That's the important.
Yeah, no blame. Yeah, super important, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think it's also interesting how you've tried to kind of relate bringing up a startup like with a child trying to walk. And when you see a child that is trying to walk, it takes a lot of failures, trying and trying and trying and trying and losing hope and giving up and trying and just standing up and just doing it. So it's really amazing. And yeah, everybody is always afraid to make that one step, to say, okay, let me try this. I'm sure even when the idea of Motherland came, as a human being, you must be at least skeptical. How do we go about it? Can we do it? Yeah. But look where we are. So it only needs that one step in there and believing in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like a big puzzle.
Exactly. I would,
Yeah.
and I would like to think about what kind of question we would like to answer for us as a team to run through a tiny sprint process together once, because sprinting in that form will, sorry,
Sorry,
no
that was
worries.
me.
Sprinting in that form will play a central role in the way we will work with the people, right? Because that is what we have to do, right? So you will have to work with the farmers in some way to find out what works and what doesn't, right? So adopting the ideas of the sprint, not necessarily all detailed, because you will probably not get everybody to play with you in the way that you would need them to play with you in a real sprint. But adopting the idea, right, is probably crucial for our success. And so we need to start practicing and playing that agile methods for ourselves. So what I would like to do is think about something that we're most unclear about, right? The weakest link we have at the moment, and make that the central question of a small sprint, and then we take some time and run through that sprint together, and get a sense for how that actually works.
Yeah, I mean, I have a burning question.
Go ahead.
So I think like the biggest challenge I can just see at the moment, and I also feel it, is definitely how to approach the farmers. And this is like a big bucket, so it's tied to so many different actions and different stakeholders. And I would very much like to play with this very simple question.
How to approach the farmers. Okay.
Yeah.
Kat, do you have ideas?
Basically, I think I don't know. I really it's really an easy question when you ask, and now when I come to think about it, it's a little bit tough. But it's just having, I think, some leap of faith and introducing ourselves to them in the best way possible. Because remember, these are people that are they are already they already know some of the projects. Like for instance, one of the guests we had is from Siaya for Mshamba. So we are not going to be the first projects in Siaya, yeah. So we have to kind of show these people that whatever we are bringing to the table is worth it, yeah. Whatever we're bringing to the table is worth it. So I think just basically talking to them, because we don't have something that we've done before that we are going to show them that we did this and this, and this person can testify, yeah. So it's more of making promises of just being there with them and showing them that we are here with you, and relating to the challenges that they are having, the farmers are facing, relating to these challenges, and just lowering ourselves so down to be like them, not high, not low, but just like them, yeah, so that they can really like trust us and just let us in. So we have to relate with the challenges. We have to show the empathy, yeah. We have to show how we feel the challenges. Like for example, you have products, but you can't sell them. You don't have the right markets. You don't have a storage method. So we need to really relate ourselves with them, really show them that we are here, we see you, we hear you, and we can help, I think.
Okay. Yeah. That's my intuition too. But we could drill down into that question a little further. And before you can do all of the things you described, they actually have to be in front of you. How do you get them in front of you, right? And then if you have them in front of you, and when you have them in front of you, how many should it be? Should it be one by one? Should it be a group? Should it be all of them? Right? These are all important questions that come out of that. So I can imagine, I don't know how your times are on those days, but I can imagine blocking most of the 5th and the 6th of December to run 2 or 3 super tiny sprints that build on one another to clarify the question or the set of questions that we need to clarify in order to hit the ground running, right? So that when you are there, you exactly know what you want to do and where you want to continue the learning journey, right? So that is something that we could do, right? And when we do that, we should actually have the entire team on board. Right? So we need to have the call with your 2 preferred team members, and we need to bring them into the loop of what we are doing here. And then we need to set aside time to go through that, to all learn together how to do that, how that functions, how the process functions, how we function together in that process, and to learn something about the process of going into the community itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, sure.
So,
and before we invite the other two team members, we definitely should schedule a few calls with them.
Yeah.
To give some kind of onboarding.
Yeah. So I think I forgot to upload last week's session, but of course we have all the sessions, so they can take some time and just listen their way through those sessions, and then we have conversations with them about the content, right? Because just listening won't be enough. But
Yeah.
Actually, I already shared the yeah
Cool.
the link so that they keep on.
Nice.
You know,
Nice. So we should definitely start having conversations with them, right?
Yeah.
We should maybe invite them into these conversations. So let me check my calendar just to be absolutely sure. But since we have that slot, okay. Next week, Thursday is an issue for me. But next week, Friday, we could do a call with all of us. Bring them in. And use that session to give them the space to ask questions about the previous sessions. And discuss the way forward.
Yeah, and then we should have a call before next Friday with the rest of the team, Kat.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You're supposed to have a meeting with them. Maybe you can have it before the onboarding session on Friday.
Yeah, before Friday. This would be great. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Cool. So then on Friday we all get together. I'll try and also make sure that Sebastian is there. So that we all get to meet and that we all get to build on the sessions we've done so far, so that they already have some progress in looking at them and come in with questions, right? Challenge us a little bit, so that we together learn new things and then plan how we want to move together. That sounds beautiful.
Cool.
Cool.
Great.
So,
Okay.
Kat, if anything, if you ask them and they cannot make that time next Friday, please let us know as soon as possible so that we find an alternative.
Okay. Friday same time for our
I would say
session.
we use this slot next Friday, and I cannot make Thursday. I know that. Maybe Sebastian can, so I'll ask him whether he wants to do a session on Thursday, or whether you want to do a session on Thursday, but I won't be able to join.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Wonderful.
Cool.
Anything else?
Nada.
Okay. No, is the session still